Hi fellow teachers, my name is Mitzi Stover, and as we're about to begin our fall 2020 term in our virtual classrooms, I got to thinking about what it is that teachers really need to lower their anxiety level and to set up their classes to have the most successful term possible. I know a lot of us have received training and professional development on tools and programs that we can incorporate into our classes. But it seems to me that the foundation of setting up our classes and what we do in those first couple of days is really critical to make sure that we have a great term. So I thought I'd share with you some of the things that I've learned and some of the mistakes I've made in my experiences teaching online. I've spent over 20 years teaching high school and community college, and I started teaching online in 2009. I've made a lot of mistakes, but I learned a lot of things along the way. So here we go. Let's get started on what to do with your Module 0. First of all, you may be wondering, what is Module 0? So Module 0 is a term for a short unit that can take place maybe even before the term begins, or more likely in the first few days or weeks of a term. It generally occurs before really getting into content, though content might be sort of interwoven into that Module 0. So elements that I like to include in my Module 0 are navigating the course, how to actually work through the course, contact information, extra help and resources, introductions, both from me to my students, from my students to me and to each other, and then digital citizenship and netiquette. And then finally, I also include a low stakes assessment of the concepts that are covered in Module 0. So the first thing that's really important before you even get to Module 0 is determining how you're going to organize your course. So you've probably written a course map or a pacing guide for your face-to-face classes, and so this is fairly similar in figuring out how you're going to organize your information, where you're going to put the content, how you're going to add in assignments and assessments and that sort of thing. It just looks a little bit different in a digital classroom. So you could organize your course into modules. Those may be by unit or by week or by topic. It depends on the age level of your students, your discipline, your institution, if you're teaching more than one subject. But just thinking about how you want to lay that out is important early on so that you're consistent. You don't have to build out your whole course, but to use that common language and that common structure for students will really help them understand how to move through your course. It's also helpful to identify objectives for modules. These could be in a separate document for yourself, but I think it's really helpful to include your objectives in a transparent way to your students or parents if you're dealing with younger students. And these don't have to be in education ease, just what do you want your students to get out of that module? I think it's really helpful to put it in student-friendly language or parent-friendly language and maybe avoid some of the jargon. You can save the jargon for what you have to turn into your administrator perhaps. And then finally, each module can include the content as well as the tasks. So you might choose to organize your course chronologically by chunks of time. So it might simply be Module 1 is the first week of school, Module 2 is the second week of school, and you could include those dates. Some teachers organize weekly, some teachers organize in 2-week increments, some organize in 4-week increments, and sometimes it varies. So in my class, the first module is 2 weeks, the second module is 3 weeks because we have more that we're covering. So it doesn't always have to be the same amount of time. You might organize by topic. So I do kind of a combination of the two. So my students start with an analysis unit, and that is Module 1, and then Module 2, which is also explained by how many weeks it takes, is an argument unit. So I'm going to show you some examples in a second. So here are a couple of examples. These are home pages. This one, neither of them are actually complete home pages, but you get a glimpse of it. So on this left example, there are links to the 5 units that, the 5 modules that we will be covering in this semester-long course. On this example, I use buttons. It's the same concept though. There's 5 different modules. Module 0 is the 6th one, or the first one if you want to look at it that way. And so these are on the home page, clearly identified for students, so they will know where to go next. I mentioned chronological versus topical organization, and here I'm using Google Classroom as an example because I know a lot of people are using Google Classroom. So you can set this up using topics in Google Classroom. And so in this case, I've got the course set up chronologically, and so the modules are labeled. So module 0, getting started, and then module 1 runs these 2 weeks, and then the topics are displayed on the left, so it's really clear to students or parents, whoever's looking at this, where they would go depending on the date. This one is organized a bit more on the right by topic, and so again, I may have course orientation and navigation, but then in my English class I might have journal writing and topics, I might have narrative reading, narrative writing, and so forth, depending on how I want to structure my class. Okay, I mentioned module overview and objectives earlier, and so that's really helpful, I think, to just say what it is you hope your students are going to get out of that module or unit. It's helpful for students to know what it is they're supposed to be learning and they're supposed to be doing. It's really helpful in this instance for parents who may be looking over their students' shoulders or trying to help them out to understand what the purpose is for that particular module. It's also helpful for us to just keep that in mind. You know, we have a lot of fun and interesting things we want to do, but we do want to tie it back to, okay, what is it our students really need to be learning? So here's an example of a Module 1 analysis overview. And this is pretty detailed. This is for a college course. Yours might not quite look like that. But what I wanted to point out to you is the labeling. So for every module, I have a module overview page, and I always have a description. I always have the learning objectives. I always have the tasks. And so, well, I'll have in bold, they're going to submit something, they're going to read something, and so forth. So it's consistent and it's clear. So every module has this page. And again, especially if parents are helping students, this is really nice for them to go to this overview page and say, okay, what is this unit about? What are we supposed to be learning? And what are the tasks we're going to have to complete? And then, of course, you go into more detail later, but this is just kind of a quick view. And I think it's also helpful for us to just stay organized in what is a chaotic world right now. Okay, so once you've got your course set up and you've decided how you're going to have students work through it, the really critical part, and I think it's best to start with this, is to explicitly explain how to work through the course. So for my classes, I always do a screencast just like this one here, and I literally walk students through the course. Here's where you click to start. Once you're returning to the class and you've finished the module 0, here's where you click to go to module 1. Here are the next buttons. Here's the to-do list where you can see what's coming up. Here's how you can click on this inbox to send me a message. Here's a link for extra resources. You might not need them now, but just know that this is here. So the screencast literally walks them through the process. It's also a way for them to be introduced to me. They get to see me on the screen like you can. They get to hear my voice. So it tends to personalize the experience a little bit more early on. The other thing, well, I'll come back to that. How you create these, there's a couple of free software programs. So I know that's sometimes a question. Immediately, okay, but how do I do that? Screencast-O-Matic is what I'm using here. Screencastify is another good one. They're pretty easy to use. You can edit, but you don't need to. It's okay if they're not perfect. You can include the picture-in-picture like I have here with my face, or not. You can just have your voice, speaking to students over the images on the screen, and then they should be captioned. So just a note on captioning. You could use the captioning software as part of these programs. I actually like to upload mine to YouTube, use the auto captions, and then I go back and edit them because YouTube doesn't punctuate, and sometimes I don't speak as clearly as I should, and so some of the words get muddied a little bit, so I always clean it up. But captioning, side note, is really important for accessibility for your students, not just for students who may be hearing impaired, but also for students learning English, and even for students who are maybe working in a household where lots of people are also in school or working from home, to be able to see the words on the screen and help them focus. So it's really, really important to caption your videos. And then I say to keep it short. You'll notice that this video here is not especially short, but I do try to keep them short for my students. Okay, the other way to show students how to navigate your course is to include text instructions with screenshots. I actually like to do both because sometimes students find the video more engaging. Some students want to return to the information and be able to skim and find what they were looking for. And also it can be a bandwidth issue. So some students may not have very fast internet, and so the videos can be problematic. So including screenshots with notations can be very helpful as well. So this information here just goes through my home page, and it explains that I want them to start with modules and move through the page. I've highlighted where they can send me direct messages along with my contact information. I've highlighted the to-do list. And so this is pretty simple. All I did here is I took a screenshot and then I copied the image into a Google drawing, and then I added these shapes and these text boxes. So it's a pretty simple and quick process. So I include both. I've got my navigation video, and then I've got this screenshot and text that explains the same information. Okay, contact information seems like a given to include in Module 0, but it's really important. So I like to give students multiple means for contacting me. So for my class, they can email me, they can message within the learning management system, like that inbox I showed on the previous screen. And I also utilize Google Voice for texting. I'll fix that typo. For texting and voicemails. It depends, again, on the age range of your student, but I like Google Voice because I can give them a phone number that's not my personal number, and I can turn off the ringer, so it doesn't have to ring through to my phone. Voicemails go right to, or phone calls go right to voicemail. But texting, I have a lot of students who prefer to text me, and so that's just an easy way for me to keep in touch with them. I have adult students, so obviously if you're working with minors, there may be some concerns there, so just keep that in mind. But be really clear on how students can message you, and if you have a preferred method of communication, say that. Also, hours that you're available, really important. If you're not going to be checking and responding to messages on the weekends, include that on your homepage so that students know if they message you on Saturday that you're not going to get back to them until Monday. That's okay. You need time to yourself and to your family. But that way students aren't thinking that you're ignoring them. They know that you'll get back to them on Monday. And then also your response time. If it's going to be within 24 hours, tell them that. If it's more like 48, tell them that. In my case, I tell students 24 hours, but usually faster, except after 10 p.m. So I will not answer their messages after 10 p.m. because I want to power down. And so they know if they message me after 10, I'll get back to them in the morning. Okay, the next crucial piece for your Module 0 has to do with introductions. So we know that humanizing our courses is important, and we know that that emotional connection with our students and our students with us is a key component of helping students be successful and want to do well in your class. So think about what it is you want to share with your students. Obviously, we maybe don't want to share too much personal information, but a little personal information does help to humanize us. So you might include a short bio, you might include a letter to your students, you might include some pictures. It depends on what you're comfortable with. I have a short little letter to my students. I include a few pictures and some things that I'm interested in, some things about my educational journey because, again, I've got college students. But whatever you think is appropriate for you to share with your students so they get to know you a little bit. This is also important because then I'm going to ask them to share with me, and I don't think it's fair to ask them to share information about themselves if I haven't shared something about me. So I like to have 2 different types of introductions in my course. So I do a couple of things. The first one, I like to have students do some kind of a private introduction to me. I find that they will say different things when they know it's just for my eyes versus for their classmates. So I've had students write a letter of introduction to me. I'm sure a lot of us have done that. I also like to include a questionnaire or a survey. I find this is really, really helpful, and it can also serve, it sounds impersonal, but you can make it really personal. So I just use Google Form. I write some questions. I try to keep it fairly short. And I think it's really important to also find out about students' access to technology and tools. So I include that in my questionnaire. So I ask them some things like, what is your name? And then what is the name you prefer to be called? That's really critical because a lot of students prefer to use a name other than their legal name, their legal first name. So I want to find that out. I want to know if they have access to a computer and high-speed internet. Do they have a webcam? Do they have to share a device with multiple people in the house? That shapes the kinds of assignments that I'm going to do and my expectations for them. So really important. I also ask questions depending on the course that I'm teaching. If they have any concerns or worries about the course, I ask them issues that they care about. I ask them to tell me something that maybe they know a lot about that others don't. And then finally, I wrap it up with, is there anything else you think I should know? And do you have any questions for me? You'd be surprised what students write for those. So even though it's a questionnaire, it's a lot of personal information, but it really helps me to get a feel for who my students are. And then I always give them individual specific feedback on their responses. I comment on specific things that they've stated, and then I also answer questions if they have them. The other piece is providing an opportunity for students to interact with each other so they get to know each other. I really like discussion boards for this purpose, so I have students do an introduction, and they just have to introduce themselves in a paragraph or two and then reply to two of their classmates, commenting on what their classmates said. So I'll see a lot of overlap. The students a lot of times will post, like if they're really into anime, they may post that in the discussion board, they may write about that in the questionnaire, but the audiences are different, and there are some differences. So a lot of times in the questionnaire, students will express concerns and worries they have about the class. They may not do that publicly to their peers, and that's perfectly fine. So even though there's overlap, they serve different purposes. And then I can go in and moderate that discussion board. I do chime in and comment, but mostly it's for them to get to know each other and to connect. And you'd be surprised how well that can work to get students to connect with each other. Even younger students can do discussion boards. Really, elementary school kids can do discussion boards. Okay, I like to include quick tips also in my Module 0. This might be how to prepare for various assignments, how to manage due dates. So, I may tell them to update their notifications, put things in their calendar. I mentioned how to ask for help. And then also how to get help if they have problems with the technology. If the learning management system isn't working or something isn't loading, they can ask me, but a lot of times there's IT help through schools and districts, and so they should be able to access that as well. Alrighty. Oh, one other thing about quick tips. So it's just, you don't want to spend too much time explaining how to prepare different types of assignments and submitting them yet. But if you have those quick tips that students can then come back to, it's just a matter of, hey, these are here. In case you run into trouble, remember this list. So you don't need to go into too much detail in explaining all of that. Okay, I think it's also helpful to explicitly teach students the tech skills they will or might need early on. And what you decide to do in Module 0 really depends on the kinds of assignments that your students are going to be completing and how they're going to submit them. I wouldn't get too deep into some of the programs you might be using, but some of the simple things that you're going to want them to do, you can incorporate that into your Module 0. So for example, something like how to take a screenshot and how to submit an assignment. So in my Module 0 this semester, I added in an assignment asking students to update their profile. We use Canvas as our learning management system. So I wanted them to update their profile with either a picture, a portrait, a selfie, or a Bitmoji. And then I wanted them to update the description. So that will help me get to know them, but it's also a skill that I think is important. But then I got to thinking, well, it's going to be hard for me to then go in and look at everybody's profile. So I decided, I really like them to know how to take a screenshot, and surprisingly, a lot of my students don't know how to take screenshots. So I created a Module 0, really small assignment, 2 points. They update their Canvas profile, they take a screenshot of it, and they submit that assignment. So I gave them really detailed directions on how to update their profile, how to take a screenshot depending on their device. I provided a bunch of links, and then how to submit that assignment. So by doing that, I was showing them not only how to update their profile, but how to take a screenshot and how to submit an assignment. So they're practicing that in a low stakes way so that later when we get to a big assignment, they know this is how I submit an assignment. Or, oh, I've run into troubles. I need to send Mrs. Stover a screenshot. They know how to do that. So I may not go through all of this in Module 0 discussion forum with their introduction post. Then I show them how to post to discussion forum. So it really depends on what it is you're going to be doing early on, but some of this can be saved later. Try not to cover it all in Module 0 because it just gets to be too much. It's too overwhelming. So I mentioned this. You may be using other tools like Edpuzzle or Padlet. And so if you're going to use those in the introduction, like a lot of teachers like to use Flipgrid early on for introductions. So teach them how to use Flipgrid for their introductions. But they maybe don't need to know how to use Padlet yet. So that maybe can come later, and you can teach them how to use it later on in Module 1 when they're actually going to need to use it. Okay, netiquette and digital citizenship is pretty important, and I think that should be touched on quite early. So again, I keep saying it, depending on the discipline and the age of your students, you would choose an age-appropriate way of teaching this. There are lots of videos out there. There are checklists. I have a discussion forum protocol, one page, even though it's a digital page, that I share with students that talks about how to participate in an academic discussion forum, it's different than social media, so that we make sure that we can have a discussion that is conversational and rich without devolving into something that could be really off topic or even ugly. So that's pretty important to explicitly teach that. What are the expectations you have for your students when they're interacting with you, when they're interacting with each other? You can also create a little quiz to check for understanding, to make sure they're reading the information or viewing the videos. Okay, now I implement a check for understanding before moving to Module 0. So in my summer class, I decided to add a quiz at the end of Module 0. So it's a 1-point quiz. They have to get 80% on it to unlock the next module. They can take it multiple times, but it covers information in my navigation video. It covers information in my syllabus, because I wanted to make sure that they were moving through that information and internalizing it a little bit. I found, because I would post my my course orientation video on YouTube, and YouTube records views, I was discovering that I had very few views for a class with a lot of students. And so this was telling me that my students were not watching this course orientation video that I spent a bunch of time creating and captioning for them. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to add in the quiz. Also, because I was getting questions that were covered in the video. Students were saying, I don't understand. Why can't I view Module 1? Well, you haven't moved through Module 0. Or, oh, why am I seeing this when I'm trying to post this, my initial post to the discussion board? Well, it's because you're looking at it this way. So it saved me a lot of time moving forward to have this little assessment, and to really encourage students to watch my video and to read through the information in Module 0. Okay, you might think, okay, Module 0, gosh, this sounds like a lot of work to set up. It's a lot of time, like we've got so much to cover, and it's going to be such a hard term in this virtual world. I get that, but I'm telling you, spending time on Module 0 is not wasted. It helps students understand and also practice what they need to do to be successful moving forward in a really low stakes way, like updating their profile, taking a screenshot, and submitting the assignment. Not a lot of points, something pretty easy, but they're practicing skills they need later. It allows you to get to know your students and their situation, the devices they have available, their internet access, all of that helps them bond with each other early on. And really it sets the tone for the rest of the term. It lets students know that, hey, I'm going to guide you through this process. I know it's uncertain. I know it's uncomfortable. Let me show you how to be successful. So it's really helpful there. And honestly, it saves you time later, because if you set everything up like this early on, you're not going to have quite as many messages from students asking for clarification, or can you show me how to submit this? Can you show me where I'm supposed to go? Taking care of that early saves you time later. It really is time well spent. Okay, last couple of words here. It's okay to make mistakes. I come to you as a colleague. It's scary teaching online. I get it. It's unfamiliar, and a lot of us have been doing this a long time, and all of a sudden we feel like we're first-year teachers again. So it's okay to make mistakes. They're going to happen. So don't let that hold you back from trying something you think will work well. Anticipate that students are going to find creative solutions. So I mentioned about my students not watching my video. They thought they could just skip through and not watch it. I've had students in a discussion forum where they're supposed to post before they can view replies. They'll post like a period so that it triggers that it's been posted so they can view what other people are reading. They're going to do this. This is how students work. So it's okay. You'll figure out where they're finding their creative solutions. It's okay to change if things aren't working. So I mentioned about setting up your modules in a chronological way or topical way. If you really get into it and you find that something isn't working, it's okay to pivot. Try not to jump around too much, but obviously if things aren't working, if you feel like it's a square peg in a round hole, change it so that it does work. Have grace and a sense of humor, grace with our students, grace with ourselves. We got to laugh at some point. It's also helpful to ask students and parents for feedback. What are they having trouble with? Is something not clear? Are they having trouble navigating? And then seek out supportive colleagues and ask for help. I know it's really hard to ask for help, but there's a lot of people out there who've been through this and made mistakes. So ask them what they think are some good ideas and have some fun. Finally, if you want a link to this slide deck, I will include it, and also a link to resources for lots of online philosophy, theory, research, but also some cool tools. And there's my contact information. So teachers, hang in there. You got this. I know it's scary and uncertain, but you can do this and start it off right with Module 0.